Welcome to the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book Workshop. In this episode, two recovered alcoholics break down one chapter of the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous line by line. Find out more at ladiesbigbook.com. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Marguerite Alcoholic, November 89 sobriety date. And thank you, Kat, for asking me to do this. And we'll see how this goes. I have never read like this many pages and talked this much, but anyway, here we go. So chapter 3, more about alcoholism. The title in itself is just going to tell us more about alcoholism. Why? Because this book was mailed out to all these people that had asked for it years ago, and nobody knew that, one, it was a disease. Nobody knew anything about it. They just probably knew, wow, I've got a problem with drinking. I've got a problem with alcohol. So this is going to tell us more. Anyway, okay, so most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think she is bodily or mentally different from her fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, she will control and enjoy her drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we were like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. So a couple things. One, just to go over the things that make us alcoholic, that make an alcoholic, two things, and two things only. We have an allergy of the body, which produces us a craving to want more, and an obsession of the mind. So if we've ever wanted to stop, we might have quit, and it's going to give us in this chapter, it's going to break it down and give us 4 examples. On this first page, when I was asked to do this, I was like, well, I want to say more than just like, wow, I relate. But anyway, when I read this, I go, seriously? Do you ever read the big book and go, wow, they know me? Like, I'm identifying immediately. But this is all going on internally inside my mind and in my body. It's like, wow, I was trying to control, or I was obsessed with, that someday that I would get back to when it worked. And I was obsessed to try to get that and the things that I come up, and we're going to say more about that later. But on this first page, they use the word illusion. They talk about we are mentally different from our fellows. I don't want to think I'm different from people. First of all, human beings don't want to be different than others. We want to fit in. But remember the distinction of honesty in this. Just ask yourself, why would they tell me this? The idea that somehow, someday, I will gain control and enjoy my drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. I got pretty creative with this, and I know some of you all have as well. I know that I got into trying to avoid hangovers and coming up with a cure for hangovers. I got into, and I kind of did, but there's this stuff that they give horses, as I used to ride horses, and there's this stuff they give horses, like a horse Alka-Seltzer. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. Anyway, back to this. They use the word illusion, delusion, insanity. Also down here where it says, all of us felt at times we were gaining control. This describes how it's progressive. And in trying to stop, that's how we learn that we can't stop, by the way. The words pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. I don't know any fellow alcoholics that don't go, yeah, I totally know that. Um, Somebody who doesn't have alcoholism that reads this is not going to identify with it. I'm not talking about with every detail, because remember, it's those two things. It's the allergy, but it's going to give us these 4 examples. It gets worse, never better. That was one of the biggest things, was when I would stop and go back and relapse, I was always blown away by how it had progressed. Like, I thought that I was somehow in control of my relapses. Like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to drink. I'll call my sponsor tomorrow. And then that went on way longer than I thought. And the ability to, like, okay, well, I'll just start going back to meetings, because I was in mainstream AA for a long time, and thought that's, was the deal. But anyway, we are like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. There's something I wanted to say here. Hold on. Oh, this part right here. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. Didn't anybody ever tell you had alcoholism? Would that have made you stop? There's a point that I had to get to where, even though my dad, when I was walking out of the house when I was 16, said, Marguerite, you don't drink like other people. My mind's response to that was, yeah. And I thought it was cooler that I could outdrink my friends. My mind would always turn it into, it was a really neat thing what I had discovered with alcohol. Other people needed to know what I knew. I mean, they were just stupid that they didn't know how to drink. But I had to get to the place and I didn't want to get to this place. And I can tell you, in hindsight, I didn't want to get to this place, the place of conceding that I was an alcoholic, because that meant I couldn't drink. And I can see that in hindsight. I couldn't see it at the time. But anyway, we were like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. Neither does this appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other women. We have tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, there has been brief recovery followed always by a still worse relapse. Physicians who are familiar with our alcoholism agree there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. But we think if you see it as the allergy, I know that I don't spend time, and people with allergies don't spend time trying to think someday, somehow I'm going to be able to eat peanuts. Somehow, someday I'm going to be able to do penicillin. Like, let's just try it this time, doctor. Let me try people who don't have this insanity aren't trying to.
Agreed. I mean, I don't know.
Maybe this will work. Making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science one day accomplished this, but it hasn't done so yet. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe that they are in this class. Our delusion. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. If anyone who is showing the inability to control his drinking can do the right about face and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we have tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. I love this because if anybody is under the impression that Alcoholics Anonymous is all about no, quit drinking, stop, we want you to stop. The book right here tells us, no, if you can drink, go drink. In fact, it will say more in a second about this. I love this because we're not trying to sell sobriety. We're not trying to say, hey, stop, it's bad. We're saying, no, please drink. If you can drink, drink. Here are some of the methods we have tried. And you guys can do your dab or raise your hand if you want to do when I read one. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever with or without a solemn oath, taking more physical exercise, yoga, reading inspirational books, self-help books, going to health farms and treatment centers, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums, it's sanitariums, asylums. We could increase the list sorry. We do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Again, it's got to be, because we have to have that. We have to be that principle of honesty has to be there. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. I love that they say try it more than once, because I, like a lot of people, tried it and it worked. Like, oh, well, I did just have one, or well, I just did have two. But then that always snowballed into more. That's why it says try it more than once. It will not take long for you to discover if you're honest with yourself. Again, if you're honest with yourself about it, it may be worth a bad case of the jitters if you get a full knowledge of your condition. This also is an allergy test. If somebody's thinking that they are alcoholic or non-alcoholic, and I had actually met somebody who did this. They were in AA for 4 years, had never read the doctor's opinion, heard about the allergy, and was like, and actually went out and drank and discovered that they weren't a real alcoholic. They didn't have the allergy. So it's like, if you don't know, and how many of y'all have, I'm a relapser. So I came in here and got a lot of knowledge, but I was not finished doing the research I needed to do, so to speak. So how many people came in and found out about the obsession and the allergy, relapsed, and went, oh my gosh, that's it. I'm seeing it like three-dimensional. There's no way of proving it. We believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking. But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. We have heard of a few instances where people who showed definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period of time because of an overpowering desire to do so. Here is one. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man. He remained bone dry for 25 years, retired at the age of 55, after a successful and happy business career. Then he fell victim to the belief, which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. Out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. In 2 months, he was in the hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. This is an example of once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And also it's an example of when people think that, well, if I'm an alcoholic, I'm not an alcoholic if I can stop drinking. And if you, and again, this is just reinforcing, we've all tried these things, and if we read it, we go, oh yeah, I tried that. And anybody get sober and like you were sober for a month and you went, well, I've been sober for 30 days. I think I could drink now. I mean, it doesn't have to be 25 years. It could be months, days, weeks. Our minds will be like, hey, see, I'm fine. I can do it now. It'll come up with that reason. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years found he was just where he had left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we were in short time as bad as ever. We were, if we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind or any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. My experience with this is I loved when I did these steps the last time, like 8 or 7 years ago. And I hang around people like you ladies that it's like, are you ready to quit for good and for all? Which was different than when I had been in AA for many years, and it was just like, just don't drink today. Are you willing to just give it up today? there was a shift, and there was something different, and it made me see what it was. I was no longer playing around with it. I was no longer like, I know I want to drink, I know I want to stop. And I wasn't just saying that. Like, I mean, like, I know that I'm not different in this thing where I made a decision to quit, but there was a lurking notion in my mind that somehow, someday, like, yeah, I think hopefully I'm going to be different. Hopefully I'm going to find a way. Hopefully. And then that was gone at the point when I feel like God put people in my life like, are you willing to give it up for good and for all? And I was like, wow, yeah, am I willing to? Yeah. So, my experience with going around this mountain and trying to control it and trying to come up with my ideas, wish I hadn't, but I needed to. Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they could stop, as he did, on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it, because none will really want to stop. And to me, that's the biggest reason, is did any of us? And hardly one of them, because of the peculiar mental twist already acquired. We'll find she can win out. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. Read that again. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 25 years. To be greatly affected, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time or take the quantities of some of us. Some of us have. This is particularly true of women. Ladies, us ladies, potential female alcoholics often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholic are astonished at their inability to stop. We are familiar with those symptoms. See large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try and get them to see it. As we look back, we feel we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own willpower. If anyone questions whether he hasn't entered the dangerous area, let him try leaving liquor alone for a year. Okay, so 16, car wreck, head injury. The doctor said don't drink. It will impede your brain healing. And I would do anything to have gotten my brain back, because I'd lost a lot of memory, long-term and short-term and blah, blah, blah. Leave liquor alone for a year. So that was my decision, and it was doctor, invested, reinforced, all that stuff. If he is, what my brain came up with 3 months into it was, no, I'm good. I'm good now. I can do this. If he's a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success. In the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remained sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. Anybody? For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which she has already lost the power to choose whether she will drink or not. Many of us have felt that we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it. This utter inability to leave it alone. This utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction, and that's what they're doing in this book and in this chapter, whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to the alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a bar. Why does he? of what is he thinking. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He is a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. What page are we on? We're on page 35. That's how you know where Jim's story is. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. Okay, so I love Jim's story. And in this first paragraph, when it describes him, notice that it's not describing a guy that is kind of the generic definition I used to have of an alcoholic, which was an older gentleman, bum, homeless, under a bridge, drinking out of a paper sack. Inherited a lucrative automobile agency, has a wife and kids, everybody likes him, intelligent, normal so far as we can see. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. The us they're talking about is Bill and Bob. So at this point, he doesn't have a sucky sponsor who doesn't know what they're talking about. He has Bill and Bob. Okay, so we told him what we knew about alcoholism and the answers we had found. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. More information. All went well for a time, and those words resonate with me. How many times did all go well for a time? And there's some other things. He made a beginning. But he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. If you go to page 14 and 15, because when I read this, I thought that he just started slacking on his prayer life. And reading this book with somebody who knows what it's really saying and can show you is like this book comes to life when you read it with your sponsor or with an alcoholic. On page 14 and 15, at the bottom of page 14, Evie, which is Bill's friend who had carried the message to him and worked him through the steps, is talking, or that's what he means when he says my friend, and emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative. Imperative means required, not important. Marguerite thought it meant important. And if something's important, it's depending on whether I think it's important or not. But imperative means required. So it's required to work with others as he had worked with me. What did he do? He carried the message and he took him through the steps, sponsored him. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge her spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, she could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If she did not work, she would surely drink again, and if she drank, she would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. I read that because it's talking about if she failed to perfect and enlarge her spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. So that's what they're talking about. So all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life, which means he failed to live in 10, 11, and 12. And if you're like me, I'm a relapser. If somebody said, well, were you doing step 10? Were you sponsoring people? Were you carrying the message? I would have been like, yeah, no, I wasn't. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. And I love this because I agreed I was a serious alcoholic and in serious condition. But did you notice that didn't stop me from drinking? Like, how many of us know we're serious alcoholics? And he knew he faced another trip. And I like to say Maggie's. He knew he faced another trip to Maggie's if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had deep affection. So there was a lot of yets. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. I came to work on a Tuesday morning. I remembered I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a business I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. A prospect was a client customer. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. Definitely underlined, because I definitely identified with that. If you look back at relapses, did you have any intention of drinking? And all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, it's going to say more. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had a notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. So this is just a snapshot out of his everyday life. I'd eaten there many times during the months I was sober, including sobriety. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. Anybody ever played scientist? Like, I'm not going to eat before I go to this party so I can get really drunk, or I am going to eat so I won't get drunk, that kind of thing. So his mind, this is an example of the alcoholic mind. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. I hate that little voice that goes, which takes me out of the delusion for a brief moment. And then, look, his alcoholic mind comes back and reassures him. But I felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on the full stomach because his mind's telling him, like, no, you can do this. And I identified. The experiment went so well, I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. It didn't. Now the allergy has kicked in. The experiment went so well, and I love this because the allergy will show up as the best idea for more. The experiment went so well, I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another allergy. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental, physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, and that self-knowledge avails us nothing. Knowing about alcoholism never stops us from drinking. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in the favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. And I love this. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. I love these words. It just says it better than insanity. How can such a lack of the proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think this is an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did on the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea went out. Next day, we would ask ourselves, in all earnestness and sincerity, how it could have happened. My mind just goes, oh, good, I'm finished. No, but I love this. I love that it describes that peculiar mental twist. I have had many times where, and I was talking to a sponsor yesterday, and I remember saying this, it put into words what I had been experiencing. And I knew that this was happening, but I didn't know how to describe it or explain it. And so reading this was just like, wow, they know me. And especially now, I mean, my mind in the very beginning of AA would tell myself, well, they wrote this book, blah, blah, blah. It's men. It was written in 1935, blah, blah, blah. No, not at this point. I read it and I go, wow, they know me. How did they know me? This describes alcoholism. People who identify it, people who don't have alcoholism aren't going to identify with this. Anyway, thanks. Pass on to Lisa.
Can you guys hear me? You can? Yay. Thank you, Marguerite. This is so fun to pass it off.
Thank you.
All right, so page 37 in the middle. I'm going to read it and then comment as we go along. So I just want to go back to what Marguerite was saying. So chapter 1 is Bill's story. That's going to qualify us as alcoholics because when they wrote the book, as Marguerite said so beautifully, they didn't have sponsors or meetings. So they just sent this book out and said good luck. So Bill's story was really to start to qualify us. Chapter 2 is to give us the information, the knowledge. They start the doctor's opinion about the body, and then chapter 2 gives us the information about the mind. So that's all of the knowledge. And then in chapter 3, we start looking at experience. We start looking at 4 different stories, one that's made up, the jaywalker is made up. And then that's going to help us to identify in a more broad sense so that we can capture more alcoholics instead of just Bill's story. So in these stories, they're trying to help us to identify what precedes the drink. Because alcohol is not our problem, it's our mind. And if we're going to start to identify that, then we're not going to look at what happens after we drink. We're going to start looking at what happens before. It's the thought process before the drink. If alcohol is not my problem. So, and then we're going to get into another story. So in some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by the nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happens. That's on page 23. That gives us more justification for this paragraph. It's a beautiful page because it talks about we really don't know, and we're not drinking because of blank. And here's some more blanks in that paragraph. Why I think I drink. We can now see that we begin to drink deliberately instead of casually. There was little serious or effective thought during the period of meditation of what the terrific consequences might be. Another example of we cannot think through the drink. Our behavior is absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink of that individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he slightly injures himself several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he is hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley breaks his arm. He tells you that he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work, his wife gets a divorce, and he is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways, but the day comes when he races out in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but really is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we were substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we have been in other respects where alcohol has been involved, we've been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admitted we have some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to. For we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that these things cannot happen. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thank you for the information. I don't know about you guys, but that really resonated with me because I thought that self-knowledge would avail it, like self-knowledge would fix everything because it has in the past in my life. So I went into the rooms of AA for 4 years before I got sober, and I'd heard about a lot of these, the allergy, and I'd heard a lot of these words. I didn't understand them for one thing, but I literally thought that self-knowledge would cure me because I tried to get in touch with this spiritual being or this spiritual process before I really knew what my problem was. So for me, the self-knowledge wasn't really alcoholism. The self-knowledge was the solution. I literally knew that there was a spiritual solution. I'd been trying to get in touch with a spiritual solution for a long time. But if you try to attack the solution without really understanding what the problem is, that's kind of a backdoor approach to what we're talking about here. But that was my experience, and it didn't work. So let's get into another story. This may be true of a certain non-alcoholic people who, through drinking foolishly and heavy at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains or bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will absolutely be unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. Underline that. That's a beautiful, it's in italics. It is an incredibly strong statement. Page 30 backs that sentence up. My self-knowledge was I thought I knew what the solution was, and I really didn't believe I was truly an alcoholic. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. That's exactly what this chapter is about, is to illustrate several experiences that we can identify with. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good, he has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He is so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearance, he is a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in the hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was alcoholic, he told himself that he had come to the hospital to rest his nerves. Oh, good Lord. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be much worse than he realized. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. Okay, so Bill drops these things in throughout the book. There's really strong statements about the mind and the body. That is a strong statement, that sentence, about his mind. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. So hold that thought as we go through the story. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. Oh God, see, I was the opposite of that. Still alcoholic, just like Fred, but I was the opposite of that. I wanted to accept the spiritual remedy, but I'd never been explained step one. We told him what we knew about alcoholism, and he was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he had a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, which was all step one stuff, knowledge, would keep him sober for the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told he was back in the hospital, and this time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told was most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking. This is like a normal guy. You guys, we are normal people. We're normal women. We just don't drink normally. I hate the word normie. Just don't ever use that in front of me. I swear I'll throat punch you, because I am a normal person. I drink like shit, but I am a normal person, whatever normal is, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all of his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it to be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned, underline that word, because he's reasoning with the very thing that's killing him. He's reasoning. This is not a feelings program. It's an action program, and he's reasoning. I swear, you guys, I always think I'm the smartest person in the room. I don't know about you guys, but I am the smartest person in the room, so me reasoning is really a bad idea. I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows. I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and I would therefore be successful where you felt. I felt I had every right to be self-confident. That would only be a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. I love that. In this frame of mind, I went about my business for a while, and all was well. I had no problem refusing drinks, and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I've been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about it. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. Please, you guys, underline that and highlight that, because it's just not about an external situation going on. And there's freedom in that. There's so much freedom in that. No one can control whether I'm going to drink again. If it's up to me and I can own it, there's freedom forever in that statement. He just did not identify with those guys yet. But here he's about to. I went to my hotel, leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal, then I ordered another cocktail, and after dinner, I decided to take a walk. I returned to the hotel, and it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for a few days, several days. Oh, I can identify with that. I know little of where I went or what I said or did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over the evening in Washington. Not only, this is in italics, it's page 24. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time, I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me. This is very, very important. There's so many points, but this is really one of the most important. If I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come where I would drink again. So this is the perfect 12-step call. Perfect. This illustrates the perfect 12-step call. They came, they called on him, they were friendly, and they said, the only thing that they told him, they didn't say, you're going to drink again. They said, if you have an alcoholic mind like we do, that you're going to drink again because we did. They're not going to tell him, go out and go drink. If you have an alcoholic mind, here's our phone number. You will drink again based on the self-knowledge, and call us if you do. We hope that you don't. Perfect 12-step call. Next page. They had said that though I'd raised a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who had said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then, and it was a crushing blow. It's so cool about alcoholism, though, because the more that we're hopelessly defeated, the more beautiful the joy is on the other side. It's really the only disease that I know of that the worse you're off, the better you actually are. The other thing I want to talk about, too, in Fred's story before we get into the beautiful part of step 3 is that there's no humility in a plan. If you have a plan, go do your plan. Please go do your plan, because there's no humility in me having a plan, because this is a lifelong journey. And today, if I still think I have a plan, it's not going to work. It doesn't matter if you have 12 minutes of sobriety, 12 days of sobriety, or 12 years of sobriety. If I think I have a plan, I haven't learned much. And that's exactly one of the things about Fred's story, is that there's no humility in this plan. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me, and they grinned, which I didn't like so much. How cool is that we get to be happy, that we get to see a newcomer, and the newcomers don't get it. They're like, why are you so happy I drank again? So awesome. And they asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic, if I really licked this time. I had to concede to both propositions. Really? Alcoholic, not just being an alcoholic, the body and the mind, but done. I'm really done. I had to concede to both propositions. They piled on heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. So they didn't just stop there. They kept going. They kept heaping on evidence. This guy needs to feel as hopeless as possible so that he's going to run after the solution, just like a desperation of a drowning man. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. So this right here goes to, there's no surprises. After we qualify someone, we're going to outline the program of action, the entire program of action. Not one of the women I sponsor is ever surprised that they're going to make amends. They know. I have them read through 102, read the rest of this program, because you have to be very willing to do whatever it takes. And there's a lot of drastic proposals, as we're about to read. Though a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy. I'm going to have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window if I want to be reborn. This is not just me trying to figure out how to get by on life. I am reborn. All the conceptions and me thinking what faith looks like has to go out the window. It's pretty drastic. It's not about making amends. That's not the drastic part. It's completely being open-minded to everything that I think I know is not what I think I know. And that's really hard for smart people. Smart. But the moment I made it my mind to go through the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved. And in fact, it proved to be. That is Fred's step 3. I read page 42 at the bottom every single time I do step 3, because Fred did not make up his mind to quit drinking this time. He made up his mind to quit drinking on page 41 and 40, 41 and 42. But at the bottom of this 42, when he really decides that he's done, he's licked, that he knows he's an alcoholic, he made up his mind to go through with the process. He didn't want to learn, he didn't want to live on a spiritual basis, but he was willing to learn how to live on a spiritual basis, because the drastic measure is a complete reformation of who he is. This is reborn, defining everything that I think I know. And he's going to go through the process of doing the work. He's making a decision at this point, his step 3, not to not drink, but to make a decision to go through the rest of the work to learn how to live on a spiritual basis. This curious feeling to what worked for Bill and Bob in the first 100. It's so cool. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. Didn't say remove the problems. It doesn't say remove the problems. It talks about the difficulties with the problems. Look, I am not inspired by people who do things perfectly. That's why people call me and they're like, oh, I'm so afraid of drinking. Well, because if I'm afraid of just drinking, then I have to do everything perfectly. But if I'm going down the recovery path, I can make mistakes. Actually, it's really good when I make mistakes, because recovery is all about making mistakes, because it's not in the mistake. It's how you repair it. I've been given the tools for reparation. I'm not given the tools to stay sober. That's exactly what Fred found here. He made a lot of mistakes, but he's going to make the best of the mistakes, because that's attractive to someone who wants what he has. I'm not inspired by people who do it perfectly. I'm inspired by people who screw up and then pull up their bootstraps and they move on. That's what inspires me. And that's exactly what Fred's story is about. It's not about drinking. It's about the fact that he did things imperfectly and then had the tools to literally use those to help other people. And the worse my story is, the more women I can help. It becomes my greatest asset, just like it has for Fred. There's nothing to be scared of, because mistakes are really what make me more attractive to newcomers. All right. I've since been brought into a way of living more infinitely satisfied, and I hope more useful than the life I'd lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one. This is a really important sentence. My old life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it, even if I could, because it's not about drinking. It's about recovery. And recovery is so different than just being sober. If I could take a pill and drink normally, I heard this in AA, and I thought it was BS. I wouldn't take the pill. I wouldn't take the pill today. And the reason why is because it's not about drinking. If I could take a pill and drink normally, I would just go back to the selfish bitch that I was, and I would just be at Houston's having a glass of wine, talking bad about all my friends, just like I was before. But because I have this program in recovery, not only do I have a purpose, but I also have a way of living that's the totally opposite of how Lisa thinks of this process of deflation. Now, I wouldn't have that before. And I really love that. It stings sometimes by my sponsor, but I absolutely love the joy of helping others. But I also love the way that my family reacts to me now. I love the fact of how I like myself again. And so if I could take that pill, there were great times before, but nothing, even my worst days today are infinitely better than my best days back then. I identify with that because it's not about sobriety. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. We had felt only the nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. But you guys, being pretty badly mangled is not a horrible thing, because the more experience I have and being out there and all the shame and the crap that I went through means I get to identify with more women. I'm not just some blonde chick trying to sell you on some steps. My experience literally becomes my greatest asset, and not just mine, but my family's. Because the more women that I can help by my experience, God removes the shame, and I get to be present for my children, and they get to see that it had a purpose, that even the shame and the pain that I caused them has a purpose. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree that with these conclusions, one of them, a staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose stories I have heard, there's no doubt in my mind that you are 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. Had you offered yourselves as patients in this hospital, I would have taken you. I would been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. This is so hard to read. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there's virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no mental defense against the first drink. Page 24. They're wrapping this up like a bow on thing from page 24, bow on the present. They're wrapping this up before they start getting us into step 2. Except for in a few rare cases, neither he or any other human being can provide such a defense. Don't you think if I thought my kids could get me sober, that would have been the first approach I took? His defense must come from a higher power. So this entire chapter is one of the most referred to chapters in the entire book. Bill and Bob, as they're writing it, back to the alcohol. This is the chapter that they're talking about, because it's not just about the knowledge, which precedes page 30. This is about the experience. And if you can't identify the similarities, not the differences, then you're really not going to be able to go through with the rest of the program with your whole heart, like the whole heart, no lurking notion. It's a beautiful chapter, and I really appreciate you guys letting me share about it today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book Workshop. This recording is not associated with any AA group or AA World Services. Find out more at ladiesbigbook.com.